Alex Thompson, a 34-year-old disabled Army veteran and father of 2 young children, thought his biggest challenge was creating a stable home for Emma and Tyler after his divorce. Then Diane Morrison knocked on his door at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning, demanding immediate removal of his service dog from the Willowbrook community. What unfolded over the next 6 months would test everything he believed about fairness, community, and fighting for the right to exist with dignity in his own neighborhood. Before this story begins, consider how well you really understand the difference between a pet and a service animal. This happened just 18 months ago in a middle-class subdivision outside Phoenix, Arizona. Alex and his family still live there today, but the community will never be the same. The moving truck had barely pulled away from the modest 3-bedroom house on Maple Street when Alex first noticed the woman watching from across the street. He was helping Rex, his 95-pound German Shepherd, adjust to their new surroundings in the small backyard when he saw the curtain fall back into place. Alex had specifically chosen Willowbrook Community for its excellent school district and family-friendly atmosphere. After 3 deployments to Afghanistan and a difficult divorce, he desperately wanted stability for Emma and Tyler during their weekend visits. Rex had been Alex's constant companion for 3 years, ever since the Veterans Administration matched them through a service dog program. The intelligent German Shepherd could sense the onset of Alex's PTSD episodes minutes before they happened, providing deep pressure therapy and guiding Alex to safe spaces during panic attacks. Rex had literally saved Alex's life on multiple occasions, including one terrifying night when a neighbor's fireworks triggered such severe flashbacks that Alex found himself hiding in his closet, unable to distinguish between his Phoenix apartment and a combat zone in Kandahar. The first month in Willowbrook passed peacefully. Alex worked from his home office providing IT support for small businesses, a job that allowed him to manage his anxiety while maintaining financial independence. Emma and Tyler loved exploring the community playground and swimming pool during their weekend visits. Rex accompanied them everywhere, his bright yellow service vest clearly identifying his working status. Neighbors smiled and waved, children asked permission before petting Rex, and Alex began to believe he had finally found the peaceful community life he had fought to protect overseas. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning in early October, delivered by hand to his front door. The Willowbrook Community Homeowners Association letterhead felt official and intimidating. The message was brief but chilling. Alex was in violation of Section 4.7 of the Community Covenants, which prohibited dogs weighing more than 40 pounds. He had 15 days to remove Rex from the property or face daily fines of $100. Alex read the letter 3 times, his hands trembling slightly. This had to be a mistake. Rex wasn't a pet subject to breed or weight restrictions. He was a federally protected service animal with full public access rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Alex had carefully researched his rights before moving to Willowbrook specifically. Because he had encountered housing discrimination in the past, he immediately called the HOA office, reaching an answering machine that promised a callback within 48 hours. That callback never came. Instead, 3 days later, Diane Morrison appeared at his front door. Alex recognized her as the woman who had been watching from across the street. She introduced herself as the Willowbrook HOA President and explained that she was personally following up on all covenant violations to ensure swift compliance. Diane was a woman in her late 50s with perfectly styled gray hair and the kind of confident demeanor that comes from years of making life-or-death decisions. Alex later learned she had worked as an ICU nurse for 30 years, before retiring to focus on community management. Diane's presence immediately triggered Rex's training. The dog positioned himself between Alex and the door, sensing his handler's rising anxiety. This protective positioning seemed to confirm Diane's worst assumptions about aggressive large dogs. Though Rex made no threatening gestures, and remained perfectly calm throughout their interaction, Alex explained Rex's status as a service animal and offered to provide documentation. But Diane dismissed his explanation with practiced efficiency. She had reviewed the community covenants thoroughly, she explained, and found no exceptions for service animals. The weight restriction existed to protect children and elderly residents from dangerous dogs. Rex's size made him inherently threatening regardless of his training, and the HOA board had unanimously voted to enforce the restriction without exceptions. The conversation revealed the depth of Diane's misunderstanding about disability law. She suggested Alex could easily obtain a smaller service dog, perhaps a golden retriever, or even a specially trained Pomeranian. When Alex tried to explain that service dogs required years of specialized training, and that Rex's size was essential for his specific tasks, Diane cut him off. The community's safety concerns outweighed individual preferences for particular animals. Over the following days, Alex researched his legal rights extensively. The Fair Housing Act and Americans with Disabilities Act clearly protected his right to live with Rex regardless of pet restrictions or weight limits. Service animals were not pets under federal law, they were working animals providing essential disability-related tasks. Alex gathered documentation from his VA psychiatrist, Rex's training organization, and disability rights websites to prepare his formal response to the HOA. His carefully crafted letter explaining his legal rights received a terse response. The HOA board had consulted their attorney and determined that community covenants superseded federal disability law within private residential communities. Daily fines would begin accruing if Rex remained on the property beyond the original deadline. This response revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of civil rights law that would prove costly for the Willowbrook HOA. Private communities cannot opt out of federal disability protections, but Alex didn't yet understand that the HOA's attorney had either grossly misinformed them or didn't exist at all. As the October deadline approached, Alex's stress levels skyrocketed. Rex began providing more frequent deep pressure therapy sessions, sometimes 3 or 4 times per day, as Alex struggled with the impossible choice between his home and his lifeline. Sleep became elusive, and Alex found himself experiencing more frequent anxiety attacks despite Rex's vigilant care. The situation affected his relationship with Emma and Tyler in heartbreaking ways. During their weekend visit, 8-year-old Emma asked why the mean lady wanted to take Rex away, while 10-year-old Tyler wondered if they would have to move again. Alex had promised them stability after the divorce, and now that stability was threatened by neighbors who viewed his disability accommodation as a community threat. The first fine notice arrived the day after the deadline, followed by increasingly aggressive letters threatening legal action and property liens. Alex calculated that the daily penalties would consume his entire disability income within 3 months, making it impossible to maintain his mortgage payments. The financial pressure was deliberate and devastating, exactly the kind of economic coercion that federal disability laws were designed to prevent. Desperate for help, Alex began reaching out to his few neighbors for support. Most conversations were awkwardly brief, with residents expressing sympathy but unwillingness to challenge the HOA board. The community's culture of compliance had been carefully cultivated through years of Diane's strict enforcement, leaving residents afraid to question any official decisions. However, Dorothy Martinez proved to be different. The 72-year-old retired teacher lived 2 houses down from Alex and had been watching the situation develop with growing concern. Dorothy had taught special education for 40 years and immediately recognized the discrimination Alex was facing. More importantly, she had personal experience with her own grandson's autism service dog and understood the irreplaceable bond between disabled handlers and their working animals. Dorothy's support came at a crucial time, just as Alex was beginning to doubt his own understanding of his rights. Her validation that Rex was clearly a working service animal, not a large pet, gave Alex the emotional strength to continue fighting. She also provided something equally valuable: insider knowledge about the HOA's operations and Diane's personal motivations. According to Dorothy, Diane's fear of large dogs stemmed from a traumatic attack 15 years earlier, when a neighbor's poorly trained Rottweiler had seriously injured her during a morning walk. The physical wounds had healed, but Diane had developed an intense phobia of any dog over 50 pounds. This personal trauma had evolved into a community mission to eliminate what she viewed as inherently dangerous animals, regardless of their actual behavior or legal status. Understanding Diane's psychological motivation helped Alex recognize that rational legal arguments would never convince her. Her opposition to Rex wasn't based on legitimate community concerns but on deep-seated fear that she had rationalized into protective policy. This realization was both liberating and terrifying. Alex couldn't reason with irrational fear, but he could expose the discrimination it had created. Dorothy mentioned that her daughter Sarah was a civil rights attorney specializing in disability discrimination cases. While Sarah practiced in California, she might be able to recommend local resources or provide guidance about Alex's options. This connection would prove to be the turning point in Alex's fight for his rights. Sarah Martinez had built her career defending disabled individuals against institutional discrimination, from schools refusing to accommodate students with learning disabilities to employers firing workers who needed service animals. When Dorothy explained Alex's situation, Sarah immediately recognized it as a textbook case of Fair Housing Act violation with potential for significant damages. During their first phone conversation, Sarah explained the legal landscape Alex was navigating. Housing providers, including homeowner associations, could not charge pet fees or deposits for service animals, could not restrict service animals based on breed or size, and could not require special registration or documentation beyond what was necessary to verify the animal's service status. The Willowbrook HOA had violated federal law multiple times, creating liability for both the organization and its board members personally. More importantly, Sarah explained that Alex had two powerful tools at his disposal: filing a complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development and pursuing a federal civil rights lawsuit. Both options would force the HOA to provide the accommodation and could result in substantial financial penalties for their discrimination. However, Sarah also warned Alex about the emotional toll of pursuing legal action. Civil rights cases could take years to resolve, during which time community hostility would likely intensify. Alex would need to document every interaction, save every letter, and maintain detailed records of how the discrimination was affecting his health and daily life. The process would require tremendous courage and persistence, especially for someone already managing PTSD symptoms. Alex spent several sleepless nights weighing his options. He could surrender and move again, disrupting Emma and Tyler's school stability, and abandoning the first home he had truly loved. He could attempt to hide Rex or find creative workarounds that might temporarily appease the HOA while solving nothing long-term. Or he could fight for his rights, risking community ostracism and prolonged legal battles for the principle that disabled Americans deserved equal access to housing. The decision crystallized during a particularly severe PTSD episode, triggered by the ongoing stress. Alex found himself hiding in his bedroom closet at 2 a.m, convinced he was back in Afghanistan and under enemy fire. Rex's intervention was swift and effective. The dog's deep pressure therapy and grounding techniques gradually returned Alex to reality and safety. As Alex sat on his bedroom floor with Rex's comforting weight across his legs, he realized that losing this partnership would literally be life-threatening. The next morning, Alex called Sarah Martinez and asked her to recommend a local attorney who could file both HUD and federal court actions against the Willowbrook HOA. Sarah connected him with Michael Chen, a Phoenix-based civil rights lawyer who had successfully resolved dozens of service animal discrimination cases. Chen agreed to take Alex's case on a contingency basis, meaning Alex wouldn't pay attorney fees unless they won substantial damages. Chen's first action was sending a formal demand letter to the HOA board, clearly explaining federal disability law and demanding immediate cessation of all fines and threats. The letter outlined the multiple legal violations already committed and warned that continued discrimination would result in federal court action seeking both monetary damages and injunctive relief. The HOA's response revealed the depth of their legal misunderstanding and their commitment to fighting rather than complying. Through their newly retained attorney, the board doubled down on their position that community covenants superseded disability law, and that large dogs posed inherent safety risks regardless of their training. They also escalated their enforcement actions, sending certified letters threatening property foreclosure if accumulated fines weren't paid immediately. This aggressive response sealed the HOA's fate legally, while creating additional emotional trauma for Alex. The foreclosure threats forced him to consider whether he could afford to stay in his home, even if he won his legal case. The accumulated fines already exceeded $15,000, and the daily penalties continued mounting relentlessly. Community tensions escalated dramatically once legal papers were served. Word spread quickly that Alex was suing the HOA, transforming him from a quiet neighbor into a perceived threat to everyone's property values. Anonymous flyers appeared around the community claiming that Alex's lawsuit could bankrupt the HOA and result in massive special assessments for all homeowners. The social isolation was crushing for someone already struggling with anxiety and depression. Alex's neighbors began crossing the street to avoid conversations. Children were no longer allowed to play with Emma and Tyler during their visits, and hostile stares followed him during necessary trips to the mailbox or grocery store. The community he had hoped would provide healing and stability had become another battlefield. However, the legal pressure was beginning to affect the HOA board differently than Alex had expected. Harold Brennan, a retired insurance executive who served as the board's treasurer, began questioning whether their legal position was sustainable. Brennan had spent decades analyzing risk and liability, and he could see that the board's attorney was either incompetent or deliberately misleading them about their chances of success. Brennan's private research into disability discrimination cases revealed that housing providers virtually never won when they attempted to restrict legitimate service animals. The federal courts had consistently ruled that breed restrictions, weight limits, and pet fees could not be applied to working service animals under any circumstances. More alarmingly, damages in successful discrimination cases often exceeded $100,000, not including attorney fees that defendants were required to pay. Meanwhile, the Department of Housing and Urban Development had begun its investigation into Alex's complaint. HUD investigators interviewed Alex extensively about the discrimination he had experienced and requested detailed documentation from the HOA about their policies and enforcement actions. The federal investigation added another layer of legal pressure while providing Alex with official validation that his rights had been violated. The HUD investigation also uncovered additional evidence of the HOA's discriminatory practices. Records showed that other residents with small dogs had exceeded the weight limit without any enforcement action, while Alex had been targeted within days of moving in. Email communications between board members revealed explicit discussions about getting rid of the dangerous military dog before it attacked someone, despite Rex never displaying any aggressive behavior. As winter approached, the stress of the ongoing legal battle began taking a severe toll on Alex's mental health. His PTSD symptoms intensified under the constant community hostility, requiring more frequent therapy sessions and medication adjustments. Rex worked overtime providing anxiety interruption and nightmare response services, but even the devoted service dog couldn't completely buffer the effects of prolonged discrimination stress. The impact on Emma and Tyler became increasingly visible during their weekend visits. Both children developed anxiety about coming to their father's house, worried that angry neighbors might confront them or that they might have to move again suddenly. Emma began having nightmares about Rex being taken away, while Tyler started acting aggressively at school, leading to concerned calls from their mother about the children's emotional well-being. These secondary effects of the discrimination highlighted why disability rights laws existed. The harm extended far beyond Alex to affect his children, his ability to parent effectively, and his capacity to maintain employment and housing stability. The HOA's actions were destroying not just Alex's life, but his family's sense of security and belonging. However, the tide began turning when Jennifer Walsh moved into the community just after New Year's. Jennifer was a single mother fleeing an abusive marriage, and she immediately recognized the dynamics of institutional bullying when she learned about Alex's situation. As someone who had recently fought for her own safety and rights, Jennifer felt compelled to support Alex's struggle for dignity and equal treatment. Jennifer's support was particularly valuable because she brought fresh eyes to the community dynamics. She could see clearly what longtime residents had begun to accept as normal: that Diane Morrison ruled through fear and intimidation, that board decisions were made without genuine community input, and that residents had surrendered their voices to avoid becoming targets themselves. More importantly, Jennifer had professional experience in nonprofit management and understood how organizational boards were supposed to function. She began attending HOA meetings, asking pointed questions about legal costs, insurance coverage, and the board's authority to make decisions that exposed all homeowners to financial liability. Her presence and questions made other residents realize they had never been given complete information about the legal case or its potential consequences. Spring brought significant developments in both the HUD investigation and the federal lawsuit. HUD issued a preliminary finding that the Willowbrook HOA had violated the Fair Housing Act through their service animal restrictions and retaliatory actions against Alex. The finding recommended immediate policy changes, accommodation of Alex's service dog, and compensation for damages suffered due to the discrimination. Simultaneously, Chen filed for summary judgment in federal court, arguing that the facts were so clear that no trial was necessary. The HOA had obviously violated established disability rights law and owed Alex substantial damages. The motion included devastating evidence from the HOA's own records, including emails where Diane Morrison had explicitly stated her intention to force Alex to move rather than accommodate his oversized attack dog. The summary judgment motion finally forced the HOA board to confront the reality of their legal position. Their attorney, faced with overwhelming evidence of discrimination, advised immediate settlement negotiations to avoid a potentially catastrophic court judgment. Insurance company representatives informed the board that continued litigation would void their coverage since the discriminatory actions violated explicit policy exclusions. These developments created a crisis within the HOA leadership. Harold Brennan led a faction demanding Diane's immediate resignation and settlement of Alex's claims to minimize financial damage to the community. Diane refused to step down, insisting that compromising with Alex would encourage other residents to challenge legitimate community standards. The board split fractured into hostile camps, with heated arguments during meetings that were increasingly well attended by residents demanding answers. The community dynamics shifted dramatically as homeowners began understanding the true costs of the discrimination. Property insurance premiums would increase significantly due to the civil rights violations. Legal costs had already exceeded $50,000 with no end in sight, and a court judgment could require special assessments from all residents to pay damages and attorney fees. Some residents began reaching out to Alex directly, apologizing for their silence and offering support. Dorothy Martinez organized a petition asking the board to immediately accommodate Alex's service dog and settle the legal case, gathering over 40 signatures from community members who had finally found their voices. The petition represented a decisive shift in community sentiment from fear-based compliance to active resistance against discriminatory leadership. As summer approached, the pressure on Diane Morrison became overwhelming. The federal court scheduled oral arguments on the summary judgment motion, where legal experts predicted Alex would almost certainly prevail. The HUD investigation was nearing completion, with findings that would likely result in federal monitoring of the HOA's policies for years to come. Most significantly, a group of residents had begun organizing a recall election to remove Diane from the board and install new leadership committed to legal compliance. The breaking point came during a particularly contentious board meeting in late June. Dorothy Martinez stood up during the public comment period and delivered a passionate speech about the community she had called home for over 20 years. She spoke about watching neighbors help neighbors through difficult times, about children growing up safely in a place where differences were celebrated rather than feared, and about the shame she felt knowing that her community had become synonymous with discrimination and hatred. Dorothy's speech was followed by Jennifer Walsh, who challenged the board directly about their fiduciary responsibility to protect homeowners from legal liability. Jennifer had researched similar discrimination cases and presented specific examples where HOA boards had been held personally liable for damages when they ignored clear legal warnings and continued discriminatory practices. Most powerfully, Alex finally spoke publicly about his experience at that same meeting, fighting through visible anxiety, with Rex providing calm pressure against his legs. Alex described what military service had meant to him, why he had chosen Willowbrook as a place to rebuild his life, and how the community's rejection had affected not just him but his children. He spoke about PTSD not as weakness, but as an invisible wound that required accommodation just like any physical disability, and about Rex not as a pet but as medical equipment that kept him functional and safe. Alex's speech humanized the conflict in ways that legal arguments could not. Residents who had seen him only as a lawsuit threat began understanding him as a father, veteran, and neighbor who simply wanted to live peacefully in the community he had chosen. Several people approached him after the meeting to apologize and offer friendship, creating the foundation for genuine healing. The recall election succeeded overwhelmingly in August, with over 70% of voting residents supporting new leadership committed to legal compliance and community healing. Diane Morrison's removal from the board eliminated the primary source of discrimination and opened the door for settlement negotiations that had been impossible while she maintained control. The new board, led by Harold Brennan as president and Jennifer Walsh as secretary, immediately voted to accommodate Alex's service dog permanently, suspend all fines and penalties, and enter good faith settlement discussions to resolve the federal lawsuit. They also implemented new policies requiring legal review of all enforcement actions and mandatory fair housing training for all board members. Settlement negotiations proceeded quickly once the discriminatory leadership was removed. The HOA agreed to pay Alex $65,000 in damages, covering his legal fees, compensation for emotional distress, and lost income from PTSD symptoms exacerbated by the discrimination. More importantly, they agreed to implement comprehensive policy changes ensuring future compliance with disability rights laws, and established a community education program about service animals and reasonable accommodations. The monetary settlement was less important to Alex than the restoration of his right to live peacefully in his chosen community. Rex could finally wear his service vest without triggering hostile stares, Emma and Tyler could play with neighborhood children again, and Alex could focus on healing rather than fighting for basic dignity. The stress-related intensification of his PTSD symptoms began subsiding once the discrimination ended, allowing him to reduce therapy sessions and medication levels. Fall brought remarkable changes to the Willowbrook community. The new HOA leadership organized community events designed to rebuild relationships and celebrate diversity rather than enforce conformity. A Veterans Appreciation Barbecue honored Alex and 3 other military families in the neighborhood, while a disability awareness workshop helped residents understand the difference between pets and service animals. Most significantly, the community established a committee dedicated to ensuring equal access and reasonable accommodations for all residents with disabilities. This committee, co-chaired by Dorothy Martinez and Jennifer Walsh, created resources for residents needing accommodations and developed policies preventing future discrimination. The committee also partnered with local disability organizations to provide education and support services for community members. Alex's relationship with his neighbors was gradually but genuinely restored through these reconciliation efforts. Children who had been forbidden to interact with him began asking questions about military service and Rex's training, leading to educational opportunities that benefited everyone. Parents who had once viewed Rex as threatening learned to appreciate his calm demeanor and specialized skills, with several families reporting that their children's fears of dogs decreased through positive interactions with the well-trained service animal. The legal victory had ripple effects throughout the Phoenix metropolitan area as other HOAs learned about the Willowbrook case through industry publications and attorney networks. Several communities proactively revised their policies to comply with disability rights laws rather than risk similar discrimination lawsuits. Alex's courage to fight for his rights had protected not just his own family but other disabled individuals throughout the region. By winter, Alex had become an unexpected community leader, consulted by neighbors on various issues and invited to join the HOA board himself. While he declined the formal position due to his need to manage his PTSD symptoms carefully, he agreed to serve as an advisor on accessibility issues and veteran concerns. His transformation from isolated lawsuit target to respected community voice demonstrated the power of standing up for fundamental rights, even when the cost seemed overwhelming. The children, Emma and Tyler, also showed remarkable resilience and growth through the experience. Rather than being permanently traumatized by the discrimination they witnessed, they developed strong convictions about fairness and standing up for others who face unfair treatment. Emma began volunteering with a local organization that provides service dogs to disabled veterans, while Tyler wrote a school report about disability rights that impressed his teachers and classmates. Rex, throughout the entire ordeal, had simply continued doing his job with the quiet dignity that characterizes the best service animals. He had provided unwavering support during Alex's darkest moments, maintained perfect behavior despite hostile environments, and demonstrated through his calm presence that service dogs posed no threat to community safety. Rex's consistent professionalism had been perhaps the most powerful argument for accommodation throughout the legal battle. As the first anniversary of the settlement approached, the Willowbrook community looked nothing like the fearful, compliance-driven neighborhood Alex had first encountered. Residents actively participated in community decisions. The HOA board operated transparently, with regular input from homeowners, and policies prioritized inclusion rather than exclusion. The community had learned that true safety came not from eliminating differences, but from embracing the diversity that made neighborhoods stronger. Alex reflected often on the journey that had transformed his life and community over 18 months of struggle and ultimate victory. The discrimination he had faced was real and devastating, threatening not just his housing but his mental health, family relationships, and sense of belonging in the society he had served in uniform. Fighting back had required every resource he possessed: legal knowledge, financial sacrifice, emotional resilience, and the unwavering support of Rex and allies like Dorothy and Jennifer. But the victory was equally real and meaningful. Alex had not only secured his right to live with Rex, but had created lasting change that would protect future residents with disabilities. He had transformed a community culture from one of fearful compliance to one of active inclusion. Most importantly, he had demonstrated to Emma and Tyler that principles of fairness and dignity were worth defending even when the cost was high and the outcome uncertain. The legal precedent established by Alex's case continued creating positive changes throughout Arizona and beyond as other discrimination victims found attorneys willing to take their cases and communities chose accommodation over costly litigation. The Willowbrook case became a teaching example in law schools and civil rights training programs, showing how individual courage could create systemic change protecting vulnerable populations. Today, Alex continues living peacefully in his Willowbrook home, working from his office, with Rex sleeping nearby, ready to provide whatever support his handler might need. Emma and Tyler, now 10 and 12, bring friends over regularly, and the house that once felt isolated has become a gathering place for families throughout the community. The swimming pool and playground that were once sources of anxiety have returned to being spaces of joy and connection. The transformation wasn't complete. Some residents never fully accepted Alex or understood his rights, and occasional tensions still arose around community policies. But the fundamental shift from exclusion to inclusion had been accomplished through Alex's willingness to stand up for his rights and his neighbors' eventual willingness to stand with him. The community had learned that protecting the most vulnerable members made everyone safer and stronger. Rex, now 6 years old and still in excellent health, continues providing essential PTSD support, while also serving as an unofficial ambassador for service animals throughout the community. His presence at community events helps educate children and adults about disabilities and accommodations, creating understanding that extends far beyond the Willowbrook neighborhood. Rex's calm professionalism has become a symbol of the community's growth and commitment to inclusion. The HOA's insurance premiums eventually returned to normal levels once the discrimination violations were resolved and proper policies were implemented. Property values, rather than declining due to Alex's presence as some residents had feared, actually increased, as the community's reputation for inclusivity attracted buyers who valued diversity and fair treatment. The Willowbrook community became known not for discrimination but for its successful transformation into a model of inclusive community living. Alex's story demonstrates that disability discrimination remains a serious problem in American housing but also shows that federal civil rights laws provide powerful protections when individuals have the courage to enforce them. His victory required tremendous personal cost, months of stress, community ostracism, legal expenses, and emotional trauma that affected his entire family. But the alternative would have been accepting second-class citizenship and abandoning the rights that generations of disabled Americans had fought to secure. The most important lesson from Alex's experience may be that individual rights and community welfare are not opposing interests but complementary values. By fighting for his right to live with Rex, Alex created a stronger, more inclusive community where all residents could feel secure in their homes. By learning to accommodate disability, the Willowbrook community became a better place for everyone. Children learned about acceptance, adults developed empathy, and families discovered that diversity enriched rather than threatened their shared home. After hearing this story, you'll never look at service animals or disability accommodations the same way again. The quiet German Shepherd accompanying a veteran through the grocery store isn't just a well-trained pet, he's a medical device protecting his handler's mental health and safety. The neighbor requesting accommodation for a disability you can't see isn't seeking special treatment. She's asking for the basic equality that makes community possible for everyone. If this situation unfolded in your neighborhood, would you find the courage to stand up like Alex did? Would you be willing to support a neighbor facing discrimination, even if it meant challenging authority figures and risking community disapproval? Sometimes protecting what matters most requires us to discover strength we never knew we had. Alex's victory shows that individual courage, supported by allies and guided by justice, can transform entire communities and create lasting change that protects the most vulnerable among us. The question isn't whether discrimination